Jobs have plummeted, real income and wealth have plummeted in the United States.
It's not the return of disco.
No.
No. This is a cargo cult.
Yeah.
Symbolic message of degradation. If it was disco, we could hope for real, genuine inflation, because back in the 70s, yeah, that was when you actually had inflation.
Well, the United States of debt addiction, $16.7 trillion. That is our current national debt. $12.8 trillion. That is the amount households carry in mortgage and consumer debt. We are now addicted to debt to lubricate the wheels of our financial system. There is nothing wrong with debt per se, but it is safe to say that too much debt relative to how much revenue is being produced is a sign of economic problems. Again, you know, back during World War II, during these original cargo cults, we had a lot of debt, government debt, but it was going into building goods and services and infrastructure. And now it's just, we've got rid of all that, the things that might lead to wealth production eventually. Instead, we just have the debt, and we think accumulating the debt will somehow make us wealthy.
Right. I mean, it's the idea of, do we need more aggregate demand, or do we need some aggregate supply? So the Keynesians out there believe that it's all about aggregate demand, because 70% of the economy is consumption. So we need to stoke consumption with cheaper rates. But without supply, stuff that's being manufactured for wages that would foster savings would be, of course, the backbone of a capitalism. You can't have capitalism without capital. Then if everyone's trying to aggregate demand from each other, you end up with what we have now, which is a currency war.
Well, you mentioned the savings, and one thing that Ben Bernanke, who calls himself a student of the Great Depression, when they look back, these cargo cultists in the central banks look back at the Great Depression, they see that savings rates went up really high, and they think savings causes deflation. So they think that if we target the savings, if we make savings bad, then it'll disappear, and then we'll have a miracle economy. The system is now set up to punish any type of savings. Good luck trying to stash your money in a bank account and outrun even the steady pace of inflation. Take a look at the current savings rate for Bank of America. And there you see 0.01%.
Well, they're self-hating capitalists. They're not socialists, per se, although you would think that they were, because the banks live on welfare. And handouts from the state. And there's no price discovery, and it's all fixed. But it's not really about socialism so much as being a self-hating capitalist. They like the idea of capitalism, but they don't want to actually work to generate the savings to be a capitalist. They just want to buy. They want to live large. They want to live like a rich capitalist, but they just never want to work.
Well, it's a cargo cultist. You can't even call it capitalism because they don't know what the ingredients
are.
Right,
it's going beyond the working thing.
They know how to act like we were capitalists. We used to be capitalists, and they know how to act like it.
It's post-industrial, post-work. It's not even about work. It's not about faking. It's not about, I don't want to work, I just want stuff. It's about, I want to do a magic dance, and I want stuff.
Yeah, it's just like the Pacific Islanders who saw magically these men arrive in big cargo planes, and all sorts of canned foods and goods and stuff happened, and they thought it was that action of the guy on the runway that brought it.
So the connection between work and savings and stuff is completely severed.
Gone.
It's completely gone now.
There are also the banks operating and the corporations operating on this whole level of islanders not uncertain where the wealth came from. Did securitization lead to riskier corporate lending? This is Yao Santos, Vice President in the Research and Statistics Group of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Their research showed that during the boom years of securitization, corporate loans that banks securitized at loan origination underperformed similar unsecuritized loans originated by the same banks. Additionally, we report evidence suggesting that the performance gap reflects looser underwriting standards applied by the banks they securitize. And what they found that they moved to an originate to distribute model from an originate to hold model, and therefore all the standards went out and then they forgot because they just thought securitization, this act of securitization was creating wealth.
Right. Before the 1987 crash, there was a man named Mike Milken who came up with the idea of original junk. You don't need to originate an A-rated bond and wait for it to fall into junk. Just sell junk from the get-go. This created a Ponzi scheme that led to the 1987 stock market crash of 22%. I was working on Wall Street at the time, and I have to laugh when I see people refer to a 1% move down in the stock market as being, a crash on the Dow Jones. It's down 1%. Try living through a 22% crash, as I did. That's a crash, okay? That's a real crash for men, not you wusses. Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, stay tuned for the second half. I'll be speaking with Sandeep Jaitley, who is definitely not a member of the Keynesian cargo cult. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Sandeep Jaitley of FiketaResearch.com. Sandeep, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks very much, Max.
All right, Sandeep, the big news in town. Mark Carney, he was at the Bank of Canada. Now he's going to be running the Bank of England. Your thoughts?
I haven't really given much thought to a new governor of the Bank of England. He's been quite evasive in what he's going to be attempting to be doing. But he seems to be of the currency debasement kind of philosophy.
Okay, before we get into currency debasement, let's kind of put this into a broader context, because these days people need to have a signal in terms of what school they're from. And in the case of yourself, you're broadly speaking an Austrian economist.
Sure.
And Mark Carney, I think, it's hard to put him into, let's say, a school, but he's definitely from a neoliberal Chicago school, Milton Friedman type of economist who believes in the sanctity of economics as a hard science. And let me ask you this thought. He uses a term, for example, that the UK economy needs to achieve escape velocity. Now, I think I know what he means by that, but escape velocity is a term from physics. It has a very specific meaning. There's an algorithm for a rocket to achieve escape velocity.
Yeah.
Isn't this another example of an economist trying to sound like he knows what the hell he's talking about?
Absolutely. I can't disagree with that. I mean, what on earth does escape velocity mean in the context of economics? It doesn't mean anything.
I think what he's trying to say is that the economy needs to grow. And to grow the economy, we need to print more money. And we're willing to sacrifice the risk of having any inflation to create this growth. But the problem is that we've had 30 years of this thinking, and every single year, from Reagan Thatcher onward, the amount of debt it's required to create 1 unit of growth has been ever increasing, almost exponentially. So we're at a point of hyperinflation.
Well, they don't know what to do that's different, so they have to portray it in a different way. So all of this management speak, all of this kind of this nonsense speak, I call it, is just hiding the fact that they're doing the same old stuff that they, as you said, they've been doing for the past 30 years, more.
I want to ask you about schools of economics. Austrian School of Economics, they do a lot of work in describing the credit cycle, which leads ultimately to failure. And this is very similar to what Hyman Minsky describes in his work, and he was very active in the 70s and 80s. Is there a connection between Minsky and the Austrian School, and is that a good model to look at in terms of where we are with this money printing and possible debt collapse?
The Austrian business cycle theory, as it's portrayed to everyone who would be watching the show, for example, is that you extend credit too much, whatever that means, and you get the retraction afterwards. Now, there's no limit to the volume of credit that an economy can handle. What happens is when you layer that credit incorrectly, in the sense of lending out short-term money on a longer-term basis, you know, so for example, if you've got a 4-year mortgage, you know, you're actually, that's being financed on at most 1-year money. So every time a year comes up, you have to refinance the mortgage. But the actual maturity of that mortgage is much longer than any of the duration of any of the funds that's being used to fund it.
All right, let me jump in, because